Hi, I'm Sonya White Jaguar. Welcome to this edition of White Jaguar Wednesdays, my semi-monthly series where I discuss spiritual subjects inspired by your questions. Today is part 3 of my 5-part series where I'm discussing ways that you can communicate with Alan Rickman on the other side, besides using the guided meditation that I have here on YouTube. To recap, in part 1, I discussed some physical tools that you can use, including tarot and oracle cards, and the tarot spread that Alan had channeled to me, which you can get on my website for free. And I also talked about ways that you can ask Alan yes/no questions. And then in part 2, I demonstrated a real-time conversation with Alan where he used mini Maglite flashlights to answer yes/no questions. So today, what I'd like to talk about are ways that you can ask Alan to convey messages to you by using physical means. And the first method I'd like to talk about is media files. So let me start with a story. In my free book on Wattpad, From Actor to Healer, Alan Rickman's New Life as a Spirit Guide, I talked about how Alan had come to me one day a few months after his death in 2016, and he asked me to give him the Reiki Level 1 attunement, but he didn't explain why he wanted it. Now, I was teaching Reiki at the time, but I had never given an attunement to someone on the other side, so I didn't even know if that was possible. So I asked Spirit, and I got yes. So I gave Alan the attunement purely on faith, not knowing if it would work, but it did, and he did some healing work with me afterwards. And then something odd happened a few days later. I noticed an unusual smell in the house. It smelled like a man's musky cologne or aftershave, and it lingered for weeks, and I could not find the physical source. So one day I took out my pendulum and I asked, and I said, is this a physical smell? I got no. And I asked, is it a spiritual smell? And I got yes. And then I asked, is this coming from Alan Rickman? And I got yes. So at this point, I invited him in and I spoke with him and I said, will you please explain what's going on? And then he told me that he had not crossed over immediately after his death. And so he asked me to give him the Reiki attunement so that he could give himself Reiki and sustain himself with that energy. So then what happened a few days after that attunement was he gave himself Reiki, and that inadvertently crossed him over. So I smelled that smell when he crossed over. So that's really when I began working with Alan. I started asking him lots of questions, and he started working as a spirit guide with me. And so what I did to kind of break the ice, I invited him in one day while I was sitting at my computer listening to some music. And I wanted to teach him a little bit about myself. And I said, I love music. This is my first love from childhood. Let me show you my collection. And I was playing some Vivaldi concertos at the time. And Alan said to me out of the blue, he said, oh, in my life, I was familiar with Vivaldi's home. Now, at first I thought he meant that he got to tour Vivaldi's house, that it had been preserved as a museum. And then later I realized, no, what he meant was that he had been familiar with Vivaldi's home country, Italy. And I could feel Alan's energy, and I felt that he loved Italy. And in fact, I thought he might have even had a home there. So what I realized was that Alan could share messages with me through music. And so what I did was I invented a little game that I still play with Alan to this day. I call it the music muscle testing game. And the way it works is I'll play a song and then I'll ask Alan, would you like to play a song? And then I play a song and I say, would you like to play a song? And I find the song that he has selected by muscle testing. Now, as I said, I have a large collection of music on my computer. Over the years, I had saved my entire collection into the computer, and a friend of mine who is a big music collector, about 10 years ago, he gifted me with a large collection of music as well. And I'm still working my way through that collection. So the folder that Alan likes to play music from is a folder from my friend's collection. It's a collection of Billboard hits. And I have all of the big chart-topping rock and roll hits from the 1950s clear through to 2010. So Alan loves this folder. So when we first started playing this game back in 2016, I played a song to convey something that I was feeling at the time. And then I asked Alan, would you play a song? And I asked him specifically, I said, would you play a song to convey something about your death? And he said, okay. And so I muscle tested my folders, and he had selected the Billboard Hits folder. And then from there I muscle tested 1950s, 60s, 70s. He had picked a song from the 80s. And so I went into that folder, and then I muscle tested 80, 81, 82. He had picked a song from 1983. And then there's hundreds of tracks in each of these folders, and they're numbered. So then I muscle tested, okay, is it in the first 100s? Is it in the hundreds? Is it in the 200s? I eventually found the song he had picked, and it was a song that I had never heard before. It was by a band called Roman Holiday, and the song was called Stand By. So I played it, and I didn't know at first why Alan had picked this song, but then a line jumped out at me. It goes, "My aftershave has given my hiding place away." So you can play this game with Alan. You can ask him a question and then see if he will answer by selecting a piece of music. I wanted to share one other story with you. About a year after that incident, we were playing the game again, and I asked him if he would pick a song to convey something about his life as Alan Rickman. And he said sure, and he had selected the Billboard Hits folder again, and I muscle tested all the folders down to 1973. And he had picked a song by Smokey Robinson called Sweet Harmony. Now, I'm familiar with Smokey Robinson. I love Motown music, but I had never heard this particular song before. So I played it, and I was very touched that Alan had picked this particular song. And I'd actually like to share a few lines with you from that song. Smokey starts off with a spoken word part, and then he starts singing. And so this is how the song starts. Smokey says, "This song is dedicated to some people with whom I had the pleasure of spending over half the years I've lived till now when we come to our fork in the road. And though our feet may travel a different path from now on, I want them to know how I feel about them and that I wish them well." And then later on he sings, "Make the world aware that you're still going strong. Go on, spread your joy around the world. I believe in miracles. If you can dream it, it can be done." So I wanted to share that because I feel that that is a public message. You know, of all the songs that Alan could have selected to convey something about his life, he picked something that talks about how much he loved the people that he knew in this life, and he still believes in them. He wants them to go on and continue to spread their joy around the world. And I took this message personally as well. I felt that he was telling me also to shine my light. So if you have a music collection and you would like to try this with Alan, I encourage you to do so. And it doesn't have to be electronic files, by the way. If you have CDs or cassette tapes or vinyl records, try that and just muscle test. You know, muscle test your collection. Okay, so what else do I recommend? Alan also does very well conveying messages with internet files. So back in 2016, when I was first learning about him, remember, I was not a fan of his while he was living. I learned about him after his death, so I started to Google him and read articles about him, and I ended up on Pinterest looking at pictures. So after that, Pinterest started to send me daily emails with suggested pins. So then I started to see lots of pictures of Alan. Eventually, they were the same pictures over and over, and I would just delete them if there was nothing new. But every once in a while, there was a picture that I had never seen before. And so Alan started to share messages with me this way. So when I first started to develop my author career, Alan agreed to help me. And I had said to him, I said, "Oh, wouldn't it be fun to sit and do like a fireside chat?" I said, "You can channel messages to me, we can brainstorm ideas for books, and you can be kind of like my co-writer." And I just kind of did this jokingly, but he really liked the idea. And so the very next day in the Pinterest email that I got, there was a picture that I had never seen before, and I don't think I've seen it since. But basically it's a picture of Alan with a woman in front of a monitor that has a fire on it. So it's like he was saying, "Yeah, I'm really down with this fireside chat. I want to do this with you." So he can do that with you. In fact, it gets better. Earlier this year, he did this with a friend of mine. My friend is a retired artist, and he's been thinking about painting again. It's been a few years since he's painted, but he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. He had struggled for years to get his career off the ground, and he suffered from a lot of rejection, so he just wasn't sure what he wanted to do. So I said, hey, let's ask Alan. So I was on the phone with my friend. I called Alan in, and I said, do you have any advice for my friend? And immediately, with no hesitation, Alan said, nudes. Tell your friend to paint nudes. And I was like, okay, I'll tell him. And so this was not really a big surprise to my friend. He's painted lots of different things over the years, but he wasn't sure he wanted to paint nudes. So he just was like, well, I'll think about it. And that was the end of the conversation. So a couple of days later, when I was going through some Pinterest emails that had come in, what do you think I saw? I saw a picture that I had never seen before, and it was an example of fan art. And I have to say, there are a lot of really creative artists out there painting pictures of Alan and doing different things. So this was a picture that apparently someone had done where they put Alan's face on the body of an artist, and you can see he's painting nudes. So I sent this picture to my friend, and I have to say, the poor guy had just come out of the hospital with a minor heart attack, and he had had COVID too, and so he was still kind of weak. And when he saw that picture, it almost gave him another heart attack, and we had to say to Alan, hey, you're showing off, man, back off. And it was actually very, very funny. So I have to make that note about Alan. He has a tremendous sense of humor. He has a very strong personality, and if you do ask him to help you, he may show that personality with you. Okay, so the last thing that I'd like to mention that Alan does with me too, he doesn't just work with electronic files like that, he also works with paper files. And you can see I have a lot of books on the shelves behind me, and in fact I have 2 more bookcases down the hall in my meditation room. So what Alan will do with me sometimes is he will say, hey, there's a book that I want you to go get. Sometimes he'll give me the title and I'll just go get it. Sometimes he'll give me the page number. Sometimes I just open the book randomly to a page and there's a message on there for me. Sometimes I'll muscle test the page number. And sometimes he just says, hey, go to your bookshelf. And then I'll muscle test. Is it this shelf? Is it this shelf? And then I'll go down the line of books. Is it this book, this book? And it's always amazing when he gives messages to me that way. One time I was on the phone with a friend, and he did that. There was a book in my friend's house that Alan had a message for him in. So that was very interesting too. So you can experiment with that and see if Alan will guide you to different physical things and convey messages to you that way. So that concludes today's discussion. I hope this was helpful to you. I hope that you're inspired to try these different methods with Alan, or again, other spirit guides or other loved ones on the other side. And I hope that you'll join me for part 4 of this series, where I'll be discussing some techniques that are more spiritual that you can try. So with that, if you have any questions, feel free to comment below or email me at sonya@sonyawhitejaguar.com. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.